Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een, amma ba'd. So we left off with Umar's advice to Sa'd while he was going up to the Persians. So he basically said, if you recall, that he was saying that you should be more afraid of yourselves than you should of the enemy because of your deeds and your actions. So it's very, very pertinent advice, and advice that probably universally applies. So what happens next? Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, he arrives in Iraq and he rallies all the Muslim forces together at a place called Al-Qadisiyah. Okay, Al-Qadisiyah is a very important region because of a battle that took place here. And this is a very important battle. It's just as important as the Battle of Yarmouk. So these are like two of the names you should actually remember. You should remember Yarmouk when we talked about it. The Battle of Yarmouk, the biggest or most important decisive battle against the Roman Empire in the territory of Greater Syria. And the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah is the battle which is one of the most decisive battles against the Persian Empire. Okay, so Sa'd, he arrived, he rallied all of the Muslim forces together near this village called Al-Qadisiyah, which was just east of the Euphrates River. He stayed there an entire month. Okay, so Sa'd is just staying there and he's waiting for what the Persian army is going to do. If they're going to come, they come. If they don't come, we'll figure out some other strategy. So then he stayed there for a while, and then finally the Persian forces decided, okay, let's come and confront the Muslim army. So when he realized that, okay, now they're ready to confront us, we should go and make some negotiations. So Sa'd, he sent a group of some Muslims to the capital of Persia, which at that time was called Al-Madain, or Ctesiphon. It was two cities. Actually, Madain means cities, because it was such a giant place, such a huge city. So he sent some Muslims over there to negotiate with the new emperor, whose name was Yazdajir. Right? Yazdajir. Okay? You don't have to know his name, but it's good to know. So once they arrived in the palace of the emperor, so the emperor asked them, why did you attack us? Why did you come here to Persia? What's the reason? So he said, is it because you found that we were so busy fighting amongst ourselves that you actually had the courage to attack us? We're Persia. How could you do something like this? What makes you think you could even take on the Persians? They're very arrogant people. So then Nu'man, one of the Muslims, he responded on behalf of the group. And he started explaining what Islam is. He started telling them, this is what Islam means and this is what Islam is, and we are here to establish justice. That's what we're here for. And then he invited the leader, the emperor of Persia, Yazdajir, who considered himself like divine. He invited him to Islam. He said, I invite you, either you accept Islam or you submit to the justice of Islam. So you have two choices. So Yazdajir's response was, he said, I don't know of a single nation that was as wretched, worse off than you, more disunited than you, and as small as your society. You Arabs, you guys were the garbage of society. You're the absolute garbage of society. And he said, we used to have the little villages on the borders of the Persian Empire. They used to deal with you. We wouldn't even deal with you personally. Those little villages were enough to keep you guys in control. And then, now, you could have never hoped to stood up to the Persians. There's no way you could have dared to confront us. So then his statement is this: if you're deluded by being here, if you actually think that you could actually defeat us, you're deluded, you're crazy. So you better wake up, because you're never going to be able to mess with the Persians. And then he said, look, but if you were forced to come here, right? If you were forced to come here because you guys come from such a backward place, and you don't have enough food to eat, and you don't have anything over there, and you came here because you need some food, don't worry. We're going to be nice to you, and we're going to give you some food, and you just go back home. Imagine this is how the Persian emperor is speaking to the Muslims. They said, don't worry, we're going to take care of you, we'll feed you, we'll put some guy who's going to give you some food, and then you could go back home on your way. You don't need to be here. So what did the Muslims do? Imagine, this is a huge insult. So the Muslims responded again by telling him about Islam, inviting him to Islam, and they admitted. They said, yes, this is exactly what we were before Islam. But with Islam, now we're better people than what you've described us with. So then they invited him to Islam, and he humiliated them, basically. He kicked them out. He said, get out. He basically said, if I was allowed to kill the messengers, if it wasn't against the rules, if it wasn't against the rules of war and all of that, I would have killed all of you right now. But since I'm not allowed to, he just threw them out in a really humiliating manner. So the Muslims were kicked out. So what happened? Now we see the Persian army moving forward, and they're ready to face the Muslims. So the battle is about to ensue. Rustam, who was the supreme commander over the Persian army at this time, he moves forward and he starts getting towards Al-Qadisiyah. On his way towards Qadisiyah, he passes by some villages and he starts conquering them. One of the villages was called the village of Burs. So he took his army, he captured all his soldiers, they captured the children, they stole all the possessions of the people, they got drunk, and then they started raping the women and killing other people. Okay, so this shows you kind of the conduct of the Persians. Then the people of Burs, and these are Persian, these are their own people, right? So the people of the village, they started complaining to Rustam, the commander, and they said, look, your soldiers, your army, they did this. This is ridiculous. So Rustam got some of his commanders together, and he rebuked them. He said, this is horrible because they've experienced the Muslims. The Muslims don't do these types of things. We're starting to look bad now, so we shouldn't be doing this. And what was the response of his generals? They started getting upset at him and saying, now is the time to show strength because we have an enemy force here. And you're showing weakness by criticizing us. Now's the time to show force. This is the only way we're going to win. So it means that they did not want to change. They basically were not interested in changing their ways at all. So before the battle of Al-Qadisiyah started up, so in the year 14th, beginning of the 14th year, discussions with Rustam started. So Rustam, he had his army directly facing the Muslim camp. Imagine head-to-head, Persians and Muslims. Now, Rustam was a pretty clever guy. So he sends a message to the Muslims. He says, I want you to send me an envoy, and I want to talk to him. And maybe we can negotiate. Negotiations with the Persian emperor did not work. So maybe we can negotiate amongst ourselves and we'll see what happens. So Sa'ad, who did he send? He sent one of the companions by the name of Rib'i ibn Amir. Normal guy, nobody special. He's not really well known in history except for this event. So this guy, Rib'i, he arrives at the enemy camp. Okay? And when he arrives, he sees Rustam. He's sitting on a nice throne, really decked out. Imagine jewels, silk, leather, really, really, luxurious place. Even though he's not in his palace, he's in the middle of, in the middle of some village somewhere. He's got all these nice possessions and everything. Golden carpets, cushions, silk pillows, everything is very beautiful, very nice. So what did Rib'i do? Rib'i, he's on his horse and he comes over and he sees all this luxury. So what does he do? He sees this long drawn out carpet that's there for the commander, for Rustam. So he goes up to the carpet and stops his horse right on top of the carpet. This is a really expensive carpet. You're not supposed to put your horse there. So he gets on the carpet, puts his horse on the carpet, and then he gets down and he takes his horse. You have to tie your horse to something, right? So he ties his horse to the cushions that were on the ground. These are very expensive cushions. And people are looking at him like, what is this guy doing? So he gets down, right? And then the guards, they come and they say, what are you doing? And they say, first of all, you need to take off your weapons. You're not going to go and meet the general, with all your weapons on. He said, look, I didn't come here by choice. Your guy invited me. So I'm a guest here. I'm going to keep the weapons on. So they couldn't do anything. They said, okay, fine, you can keep your weapon. He's going to be safe anyway. It's not going to be a problem. This is a battlefield. So Rustam is also dressed in armor. He should be fine. So what does Rib'i do? He starts walking on the carpet with his lance. So he's got a spear. So he starts walking with the spear on the lance, using it as a staff. And he's ripping up the carpet, basically. And he's walking forward. So he walks forward, and he starts messing up this carpet. And then he goes, and he sits down on the floor, next to Rustam. Now they put a special chair for him. He doesn't want to sit on the chair. He goes and he sits down on the floor. He doesn't need a seat. So then Rustam is looking at all this. Everybody around him, they're looking at this. Look at this guy's weird. We give him a chair, he doesn't want to sit. He's messing up our place. What's going on? So Rustam asks, he says, why did you come here? Meaning, why did you Muslims come here in the first place? So this response is really a historical response. It's a very famous statement in Muslim history. Rabi'i said, Allah brought us here in order to offer people freedom from the worship of slaves and bring them to the worship of Allah. To free them from the narrowness of this world and to allow them a wider expanse, and to deliver them from the injustice of other ways of life to the justice of Islam. Very beautiful statement, explaining why they actually came to this region. Right? So Rustam asked him, he said, I need some time. I want you to give me some time. Let me think about it. Let me think about this, Islam that you're telling me about and everything. Give me some time. So he responded, he says, our Prophet taught us, you get 3 days to think. This is a battle, right? You have 3 days to decide what you want to do. You have 3 options. You either accept Islam yourself, you can do that. You either pay the poll tax, the jizya, and come under Muslim protection, or if you don't want any of those 2, we're going to end up fighting. So Rustam asked him, he said, are you one of the leaders of the Muslim army? And he said, no. So then he said, how can you make these decisions? How can you tell me I have 3 days? How can you tell me I have 3 options? What right do you have? So Rabi'i responded, he says, no. I'm not a leader, but all Muslims are like one body. The lowest of the Muslims can guarantee protection on behalf of the highest of them. So meaning in a war, when you give somebody else protection, and you say, look, this man stopped fighting me. He is protected now, nobody can touch him. And he's going to come with me. The lowest of Muslims can give the noblest of people on the battlefield or anywhere else the highest level of protection, and nobody can touch them. So he's explaining to everyone around who's listening in the Persian camp, this is what Islam teaches. So imagine for the Persians, this is huge, this is revolutionary, because the Persians, there used to be an upper class and there used to be a lower class. And that's pretty much it, right? So this showed a big thing. So the next day, Rustam calls another guy. He says, I want to see that guy again. Send me that guy again. This time, Sa'ad sends another person. He sends Hudhayfa ibn Mihsan. So when Hudhayfa came and he arrived, he started acting the same way. He started behaving just like him, because they thought this first guy who came, this guy must be some special guy. He's specially trained. Nobody acts like that. So they sent a second guy, just to show him that, look, all the Muslims, they all act like this. So he went over there, and he acted the same way. Okay. The following day, Rustam said, I want you to send me another person. So they sent him another person. This time they sent Al-Mughira ibn Shu'bah, another companion of the Prophet, peace be upon him, who's a little bit more well known. So what did he do? Mughira started doing the same thing. He went straight for Rustam where he was sitting down, and he sat down right next to him. Imagine this is a commander, this is a very high-ranking commander. He went and he sat down right next to him on the same chair. So the guards of Rustam, they grabbed him and they pulled him out. Said, what do you think you're doing? You can't sit there. So then Mughira made a statement. He said, we assumed that you were intelligent people. So we really thought that you Persians, you're really intelligent, you're smart people. That's what we thought, because you have a high civilization and all that. But now I see that you're among the most foolish of all people. We Arabs, we do not enslave one another unless we're fighting each other. See, only when we're fighting each other do we actually enslave one another. He said, I thought that you actually cared for your own people the way that we care for our own people. But now you've made it clear for me that some of you are lording and exalting themselves over other people. And he says, this state of affairs is not going to continue. You guys will not remain like this. Now keep in mind, this is a public announcement. Rustam is not the only guy there. The guards are there. There are some other noble people there. So they're all listening to this. It's affecting them. So this was like their da'wah. Their way of calling them was to show them the simplicity of Islam and that we're not interested in all these luxuries. We don't care about these cushions and all these things that you guys have. You're so impressed. You're so impressed with your own wealth that it's distracting you. That's the message that they wanted to give to him. So what happened? Rustam responded. Before other people could start getting affected, he didn't want other people to start getting this message. So Rustam responded and he started talking about how great the Persians are. We're this and we're that. And then he started messing up. He started talking bad about the Arabs. You guys are the poorest and the most despicable of people and all of that. Al-Mughira, he acknowledged. He said, you're right. You're right. We are poor. And we don't have them, we don't have all the luxuries that you have. And we don't have all of these things. But then Al-Mughira, he reminded him, Allah tests people with wealth. He said, Allah will test you with your wealth. And you people have failed the test. And he left. That's it. He had delivered his message. And that was sufficient for him. So, it means that after the third day, Rustam decided, no, we're going to fight. So, the fight was inevitable. So, the battle of Al-Qadisiyah was going to happen. The Persians had about 150,000 troops. Okay, huge army. No, the translator. No, there's always translators there. Yeah. So, the Persians, they mustered up 150,000 troops. And they crossed over the river to meet the Muslims. So, they are meeting side by side. Sa'ad was not able to actually Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas is the commander of the army. But he is not able to actually be in the battlefield because he's suffering from boils. So he's got some boils on his body, he can barely sit. So he has to command the army from a distance because he's so injured, he cannot even be on the battlefield. So the battle broke out and the Persians, they had 100 combat elephants. So we saw last time in the Battle of Jalula, in the Battle of the Bridge, for example, we saw what the elephants could do, right? And how they crushed and actually caused one of the major defeats of the Muslim army. So they had so many elephants and they were really difficult to deal with. So the first day of fighting, the Muslims were losing badly. They were losing very badly because of these elephants in particular. They still have not figured out exactly how to deal with the combat elephant. What do you do with it, right? So the next day, okay, they started learning. And they started figuring out, okay, there's a way to get to these elephants. So what did they do? They said, either we shoot the riders on the top rather than aiming for the elephant. Just aim for the guy who's sitting on top of the elephant, number one. Number two, if you can get around the back of the elephant, then the guy who's sitting up there, he has to have a seat. And the seat has like a seat belt going around the entire elephant. So they figured out if you can get around the back and just cut that belt off, the guy's going to fall off from the top. So that's the second way they figured out to get the elephants. And the third thing is that they say if you shoot the eyes of the elephant can't see anymore. So they started shooting at the eyes. So they figured out strategies. It shows you that the Muslims, even though they had a problem dealing with the elephant, they started learning over time because they were not used to this type of warfare. Persians were way more advanced than them in terms of military strategy and military equipment and all of that. So the second day, it went a lot better. Okay? And the third day, the battle kept on going. See, usually in war, what happens is you fight the whole day and then you rest at night. But this battle, this time, or sometimes there'll be a surprise attack at night. This battle, the third day, it just kept on going. It didn't stop. They went throughout the entire night. And the Muslim army, they kept telling everyone, they said, anyone who just stays patient for one more hour, just one more hour, that's the guy who's going to win. If you can just stick it out for another hour. That's the way that it works. Like, if you know about the boxing matches, Muhammad Ali, world champion, what was his strategy generally? His strategy was, you just last till the end. And you tire out the other person. So this is exactly what the Muslims were saying. If you can just last a little bit longer than your opponent, you're going to win. And the interesting thing is this. The Muslims, they're used to staying up at night and staying up in the daytime. Why are they used to staying up at night? Qiyamul Layl, prayer. So the thing is, the Persians are not used to, they're not used to staying up at night. So the Muslims, because of their prayer habits, they actually have more ability and more training to stay up and have more energy throughout the night. And this is how they won this battle. A very significant and very important battle. So they stayed throughout the night. They managed to get through to the enemy camp. They even got to Rustam's camp. Rustam was killed and the enemy retreated. So the battle was over. Okay? So this is how the Battle of Qadisiyah, and this is all very summarized. There's a lot of details, but we have to get through it. We have to get through it pretty quickly. Okay? So in Medina, Umar, he knew how important, the Khalifa, he knew how important this battle was. So this gives you a little bit about Umar. Umar, every day while the battle's going on, he used to go outside the city of Medina waiting for a messenger to come. Give him some news of the report. What's going on with the battle? I need to know the details. The day when the news was coming from a new messenger, Umar was outside the city. And he sees the guy coming. And he says, where are you coming from? He says, I'm coming from Qadisiyah. He says, okay, give me some information. And the guy is like, okay, yeah, the battle is won. So, okay, tell me what happened. He says, man, I don't got time for you. I got to go. And I have a message for the Khalifa. Right? So he starts going and Umar starts running beside him. The guy is riding on an animal and Umar's running beside him. Okay, give me some more information. Okay, so what happened? Okay, so how many people died? Give me some more information. So then he realized afterwards, when Umar got into the city, everyone started saying, Assalamu alaikum Amir al-Mu'mineen, Assalamu alaikum ya Khalifa, Assalamu alaikum ya Khalifa. Then he realized this guy's Umar. So it shows you something interesting, that Umar didn't used to dress special like a Khalifa. You can't even notice who he is, right? Even the messenger couldn't tell who Umar was. It also shows you the importance that Umar attached to getting information. He was very concerned about what was going on. He was not one of those guys who was, going on, golfing vacations, one of those presidents that just goes on vacation and just chills out over there. He was somebody who was always interested in what's going on. So he got the news. And it shows you the simplicity of the leader. So what happened after this? The Persians, after being defeated, they quartered themselves at Babylon, which is one of the cities. And the Muslims remained at Al-Qadisiyah for about 2 months, just waiting. What's going to happen next? Are the Persians going to come back? Are they going to attack or whatever? We don't know. Finally, the Persians decide, okay, it's time to go back to the capital. So they go back to Al-Madain, Ctesiphon. Okay, so they go back to the capital and they're regrouping over there, and this is where the emperor of Persia is. So now we move on to the conquest of Al-Madain. Should be Ayan. Ctesiphon, Madain, was the largest city in the world at that time. Okay, and this is according to non-Muslims, in the sources. At that time, out of all the cities in the world, China, everywhere, this was the largest city in the world. It shows you how important Persia was at the time. So the Muslim army decided it's time to go and take the capital, because they're going to keep on launching attacks back at us. We need to put an end to this Persian Empire. So as soon as they marched to the city, they were not too far from the city. Now, by the way, the city of Al-Madain, it's separated by a river. So there's a western part of the city and there's the eastern part of the city. Okay? So they arrived at the western part of the city. As soon as they saw what's called the famous Arch of Khusro. Khusro is the emperor of Persia. It's the name, like Caesar, it's a name. This arch actually is, I think, it's still preserved today. And it shows you it was a symbol of their civilization. It was a symbol of the greatness of Persia. As soon as they saw that arch, which was well known, everyone knew about it, this is like the symbol of Persian power, they remembered the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, who said that a small group of Muslims will conquer the White Palace, the house of Khusro. So at that time when this statement was made, no Muslim could imagine that the Muslims would ever be at the capital city like this in front of the Persian Empire. They couldn't think about it. So they almost like the statement was something like, this is not going to happen in our lifetime. And it happened just a few years. Just a few years after the Prophet ﷺ made this statement. So they remembered this, and he said the Baytul Abyad, the White House technically, was referring to the White Palace. I know some people take this hadith and they turn it into American White House and all that, but generally it's referring to Palace of Khusro. American president is not called Khusro. So what happened? The Muslim army, they laid siege to the western part of the city. So the siege began. Okay. Yazdajir, the Persian emperor, what did he do? He crossed over the river to the other side. He said, right now we're not in a shape to deal with the Muslims. He crossed over the river to the eastern side and he destroyed all the bridges and he barricaded the entire river so that the Muslims cannot cross. So he is retreating basically. He's keeping himself safe on that side. Okay. Then what happened? Sa'd was looking around. How are we going to get across this river? You can't just cross a river, right? So they looked and they were searching and they figured out a way to get over. They found a ford. A ford in the river means like a little narrow place where it's a little bit shallow water. You can possibly go in. But remember, these are Arabs, they're not used to crossing rivers. Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas says, it doesn't matter. We're going through. So what do? Sa'd says, you cover me and let's go. Everyone on their horses literally rode through the river during the shallow point of the river. But this is a very powerful river, right? So the current is going. So if you make one wrong step or you step in one wrong place, you're going to drown. Why are you going to drown? What if you can swim? Could the Muslims swim? Yeah, they learned how to swim, don't worry. Most of them can learn how to swim. Why are you going to drown? You're full of armor, right? You don't leave your armor over there and then you cross over to fight an army. You have to keep wearing your armor, otherwise you're going to get shot by them and you're going to die. But if you cross and you make one wrong step, you're going to drown and you're going to die. So it's a very difficult journey. So what did they do? They crossed and they started reciting Quran while they're crossing over. And Sa'd says, we're crossing no matter what. So they had one group of the Muslims stay back and they were covering them. So make sure the Persians wouldn't come. And they all crossed over eventually. Only one guy fell off his horse because of the current. But the Muslims caught him and they saved him as well. So nobody actually died throughout this. And this is a huge army, by the way. And this is a very, very dangerous maneuver. But Sa'd was determined and he had the trust in Allah. And he says, we're going. It's possible to do it. We're going to do it. So they crossed over. As soon as they made it across the river, Yazdajir realized that this entire Muslim army is here. Somehow they got over to the other side. We got to get out of here. So he left and he fled to the city of Halwan. He said, we're gone. So basically they ran away. So now the capital city of Persia, the seat of the Persian Empire, had been taken over with the Persian forces retreating. So now what happened? The Muslims, they entered this city, huge city, with no opposition. Nobody put up a fight or anything like that. And this became the center of the Muslim power in Iraq at this time. What did Sa'd do? Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, who's the commander of the army, he went straight to the White Palace. And he entered into the palace. And he went and he prayed inside. The first thing you do upon being victorious is what? You start celebrating. You throw a party. Like sometimes when Muslims have a victory somewhere, what do? You start playing around, start getting really happy, start taking a break. The first thing he did was put his head down on the floor and he started praying. They took the throne, okay, the throne of Khusro. Imagine this really luxurious, really nice throne. They removed that. Sa'd didn't need to sit in that. They removed that and they put a pulpit. And they said, we're going to start khutbah from now on. The Jummah prayer is going to be prayed over here. And they started praying inside this fancy white palace that belonged to the Persians. For the first time, the prayer was made. Sa'd recited the verses of the Quran, which are from 44th chapter. He recited the verses, how many gardens and fountains have they left behind? And how many fields and noble sights? And how many a luxury they used to rejoice in? This is how it happened. And we made other people inherit all of this. It's talking about the previous nations of the past that lost all of that luxury. And he tested them and they failed. And other people went and inherited that. So he remembered that verse and he began reciting that verse in his khutbah. So afterwards, what does Sa'd do? That's the verse there. Sa'd took the spoils of war that were left over and he had to send a portion to Medina. This was Muslim practice. 1/5 has to go to the Baytul Mal, the Muslim treasury. So he sent all of these jewels. Now the thing is, what is he sending? This is not just coins and money that they're sending over. This is the Persian Empire. We're talking about centuries upon centuries of power, conquest. Imagine you go to like one of the world powers today. You go to their museums. What do you find? Go to the British Museum, if you've ever been to the British Museum. Pieces from all over the world because they had conquered different places. You have pieces from Egypt and pieces from Persia and places from everything, all different sorts of things. So these are things that the Royal Museum in the palace had so many priceless heirlooms, priceless artifacts and all of that. Throughout all the dynasties in the past that had been inheriting all of these things, and now it belonged to the Muslims, all of it. So they had everything. They had coats of mail, armor. They had swords coming from China, coming from Rome, coming from India. The question is, where did they get all this stuff? How do you get swords and armor and stuff from China and Rome and India? They're not trading. They had conquered these regions. They've been fighting this was a major empire. They've been fighting with China in the past, throughout centuries. They've been fighting with with the Romans. They've been fighting with everybody. So this is huge. So just to give you some examples, one of the generals, Qaqa ibn Amr, he was given permission to choose one of the swords. Which sword did he choose? He chose the sword of Heraclius, the emperor of the Roman Empire. Which shows you that even when they were fighting, even sometimes they even got Heraclius' armor, the emperor of Rome's armor. So it shows you these were very, very powerful people. So all of this wealth was pretty much, most of it was going back to Medina. And Umar is receiving all of this. So what does he do? Umar enters into the masjid and he sees all the wealth and all the jewels and all these things that have arrived from Persia, from the capital of Persia. He sees jewels, pearls, gold, and he starts crying. So Umar, he starts crying. So one of the Muslims, they ask him, why are you crying? This is not the time to cry, this is the time to thank Allah. You should be thankful to Allah. Allah has given us all this victory. So Umar started crying and he says, whenever Allah gave wealth to a nation, they began to bear hatred and envy towards one another, and Allah caused them to fight amongst themselves. That's why I'm crying. Because this can be a huge test for us. It's going to become a problem for us. And this is what Umar was understanding. Among the valuables that was there was this one carpet. And this carpet was named after the season of spring. A really extravagant carpet. It's a season of spring. So basically what they used to do is, the Persians, they used to get drunk, and they used to sit on this carpet, and they used to just have their own feast on this carpet. It's a very luxurious carpet. Let me just tell you a little bit about the carpet. Okay? It basically makes you feel like you're in springtime. So it has trees, plants, flowers, and fruit, right, on the carpet. Imagine this, all the trees on the carpet are made of gold and silver. The leaves of the trees are sewed in silk. The fruits are gems, rubies and sapphires and emeralds and all different colors, right? This is 60 square feet, huge carpet, right? So just imagine, this shows you the luxury that the people were in. So Umar is deciding, what should we do with this carpet? This is a huge, this is priceless, this is so expensive, what do we do with this carpet? So he met and he started consulting with people. Some people advised him, you preserve the carpet as it is. Because this is a very, you can't just get this made overnight. This is a huge thing. It has to be kept intact. Some other people argued, they said, no, you don't want to be stuck with this thing. This is going to cause a problem as well. Umar finally decided, this is going to be a bad precedent for future leaders if we keep this kind of luxury amongst us. So he ordered that the carpet be cut up into little pieces and distributed among all the people and sold. He said, let them take the money and distribute all the money amongst the people. And they did that. So he wanted to make it clear that, some people today, they'll look at it and say, this guy's crazy. Why did he do something like that? This is a priceless thing and it's a part of history and all that. But what can it lead to? So Umar was very, very careful when it came to luxury. Okay? Let's move on. The Battle of Jalula. So we had not seen that. The Battle of Jalula. After conquering Al-Madain, the Persian emperor, even though he was gone, he retreated. Yazdajir was gone. The army was still not too far. So the army had not run away. The army was at a city not too far from Al-Madain to the north. So they fortified themselves and they dug a trench around their fortresses. So they had fortresses and they dug a trench all around. So remember, these are, where did they get the idea? Where did the Muslims get the idea for the trench? We talked about from the Persians. The Persians know how to battle. So, but this time they had something else. They dug a trench around all their fortresses and then they spread caltrops all over the region. Does anyone know what a caltrop is? Okay. A caltrop is basically two pieces of metal that you wind together and they stick out almost like a giant metal thorn. Imagine like a giant thorn, but that's made of metal, right? And you spread them out all over the place. What's going to happen if either soldiers or your horses or your camels try to go and get near the trench and you're running? Hopefully maybe you can jump over the trench, or you can do what Khalid did before and throw the camels in the trench. You're going to get stuck on those. These are like basically old style landmines, right? So they laid them out all over the place. So the Muslims were not able to move forward. So it just shows you some of their technology. 12,000 Muslim soldiers were dispatched to deal with the Persian forces. They went and they tried to, deal with this army, and the battle lasted for 80 days. After 80 days, the Muslims could not get around the trench. They could not figure out a way to get over the trench because they've just never dealt with this before. Finally, after 80 days, after a very long time, they finally found one spot where they could actually penetrate. They could actually get through, where there weren't too many caltrops. It was a small area. They managed to get across. As soon as they got across, fighting began, and within a few hours, the fight was over. The Persians fled to the borders of Iran. So there's Iraq and then there's Iran, which we're going to see in some maps. Why is this so significant? It's significant because now the Persian army is gone from Iraq. The entire area of Iraq is under the control of Muslims. Now the rest of the Persian Empire is out to the east, which is the area of Iran. Okay? So Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas, he decides we need to go after the Persians. We're going to go into that territory and we're going to keep pursuing them. But remember, Umar, like Abu Bakr before him, they make every decision. The Khalifa makes every decision. So Sa'ad sent a message to Medina in saying, we want to go forward now that this is done. Jalullah is done, the capital is taken over, we need to go forward. And Umar said no. Umar said, you're not moving forward anymore. Now we need to preserve and protect the Muslims. So this is too dangerous and we're not going to get involved in these dangerous tactics. Around this time, about a year later, the Muslims are living in the capital of Al-Madain. Right, this is their capital now. Some of them are enjoying themselves. There's other things going on. But the Muslims start complaining that, you know what, the weather here, we're not used to this weather. This weather is extremely difficult. So they started getting sick. They started getting weak. They started, their complexion was changing. So it was very, very difficult for them because they're not from this region. So it's very hard for them to live in that area. Right? So they send a letter to Umar and they say, we can't stay in this city anymore. Despite the luxury and everything, it's very difficult for us. We need to do something about it. So Umar said, okay, we're going to build some new cities somewhere where the weather and the climate is good and the location is strategic. Because the problem with Madain was that you have two sides, and on one side you have the river that's blocking them, and you have some other rivers. So he says, you choose a city somewhere not too far which has good weather, and between Medina and the city there's no rivers, no bridges, so that we can send, basically there's a safe passageway. It's going to be a clear path. We won't have any issues. So what do? They start looking around. And they start searching around and they find a city of Kufa, which they called Kufa later on. They basically found this place of Kufa, which was on the west bank of the Euphrates River. And Sa'ad went there and they started building. So they said, we're going to start building a city from scratch. So Umar gives them the instruction, he gives them permission, he says, okay, you guys can build you can build houses, you can do whatever you want, but one condition. No one is allowed to have more than 3 rooms in their house. Because he's limiting things. Don't make giant buildings, because then we're going to become exactly like the Persians were. So he's giving them specific advice. So a man by the name of Abu Hayyaj, he was an engineer. He mapped out the entire city. What this city is going to be like. This is a planned community. Right? So Kufa is one of those cities, it didn't just evolve over time. It was a city that was planned from the beginning, kind of like, Irvine and these other cities, they're planned from the beginning. So he came up with certain measurements. He said the main street will be 40 cubits, right? 40 arm spans in width, so that enough traffic can pass through. The smaller streets on the sides, they're going to be 20. The other main road next to the main road is going to be 30. The alleys will be 7 cubits. So this was like precise planning. They figured out how to map an entire city by this time, right? And the first thing that they built in Kufa was a masjid, and then they built the house of Sa'd. Okay, so then this became a city, and after Kufa was built, another city to the south was built called Basra. Another city which was built from scratch, and they found it on the same model. So these 2 cities are very, very important cities in the history of Islam, which we're going to be coming back to. These cities were made from scratch, basically. They weren't there before. They weren't cities before. So basically, Kufa was going to be the head of operations for northern Iraq, and Basra, which was in the south, was going to be the head of operations for southern Iraq and other parts of southern Iran when they moved that direction. Okay, so these cities became rapidly populated very quickly. Why? Because of the climate. So it shows you how cities kind of form. This is kind of interesting, and it's a good lesson to learn. People form cities for different reasons, right? Sometimes it's just because it happens to be a palace there, or sometimes it happens to be good jobs there. But in this case, it shows you that you actually have the potential, when you're in a position, to start from scratch, and people will come and inhabit and populate that area, right? So Basra was founded on the same model. It was mapped out. So the area, what we're looking at here, by the way, this is a modern map. Basra is right here, right? So understand, this is Medina. This is, Medina up here. Okay, Basra is here, and Kufa is around here. Okay, so it shows you clear area, and this entire region now pretty much belonging to the Muslims. The Persians have retreated to these areas. The Persians pretty much control like all this area around here. Okay, still huge area. Okay, but we're going to see what happens. So another incident that took place, this is a really interesting incident, is that one of the Persian commanders by the name of Hurmuzan, he was in the city of Ahwaz. City of Ahwaz is not too far from Basra. Kind of Basra and Kufa, that area, to the east. So he retreated to the city, and he started capturing other cities around, which were actually controlled by the Muslims. So the Muslim army, what did they do? They dispatched an army to go and fight Hurmuzan. When they started fighting, Hurmuzan gave up, and he says, okay, I give up. I want a peace agreement. I want a peace treaty. So what did the Muslims do? They say, okay, you have a peace treaty. So he agrees, okay, I'm going to pay the jizya, I'm going to pay the poll tax, and we're going to be at peace. So that he's at peace. Just a few days later, he got an army together and they had a revolt. So he tries to take over the city again. Muslim army is dispatched back over there, and they defeat Hurmuzan one more time, and then he negotiates a peace treaty again. But this time, obviously, with the second peace treaty, you have to give more stricter, regulations. After that, so this is two times this guy made a peace treaty and defected. Then Yazdajir, the Persian emperor, he started gathering together this really large army. And he sends a letter to Hurmuzan. And he says, we got the reinforcements for you. We're ready to take out the Muslims now. Join us. So Hurmuzan, again, for the 3rd time, he runs away from the city, he gathers a bunch of soldiers, and he starts preparing to attack the Muslims. The Muslim army goes again, this time, to go and put this guy, in his place. Abu Musa al-Ash'ari was dispatched. Muslim army goes over there. And what does he do? He surrenders again, and he says, okay, I want a peace treaty again. For the 3rd time. But this time, He knew that this guy is not in any position. So he says, okay, we're not going to give you a peace treaty. This is too much. He said, okay, I only have one condition. I have one condition. We will surrender if you send me directly to Medina, and Umar the Khalifa is going to decide what happens to me. You guys don't get to decide what happens to me. I want to be sent personally to Medina, and if Umar wants to kill me, Umar can kill me, but not you guys. He said, well, this guy is in no position to be making any type of agreements like this. But the Muslim army anyways, they don't want unnecessary fighting above and beyond. So they say, okay, you put down your weapons, we will send you to Medina. So they agreed. So they send this guy all the way to Medina, and Umar is going to be dealing with him. Okay, so he's escorted to the city of Medina. Right? When he gets to Medina, he's coming in. They ask him, they said, put on all your nice clothes. Because when you're traveling, you don't wear your nice clothes, right? So put on your nice clothes. So he put on his silk and gold clothing and everything. He put on his crown. Because even the generals, they used to wear crown, golden crowns. So he comes in all decked out, really nice. He's going to go in front of the Khalifa thinking that, you know what? I'm going to make myself look like a very respectable, honorable person. He's going to show me some leniency, some dignity. I'm a noble person. So they go and they find Umar inside the masjid on the floor sleeping. Okay, Umar sleeping on the floor. And Hormuzan, he asks, he's like, okay, that's the Khalifa? Where are the security guards? They say, Umar doesn't have any security guards. He says, there's no security guards? He says, no, there's no security guards. Okay, fine. So Umar wakes up. And then they tell him, this is Hormuzan, this is the guy who just betrayed, the Muslims so many times. What should we do with this guy? So what does he do? Umar asks him, he said, you broke your promise so many times. What do you think you deserve? What should we do with you? So this Hormuzan, remember, Persians are clever, they're very clever people. Even if they meant not moral, they're very clever, they're very intelligent people because they studied all these different sciences and all that at that time. So he says, you know what, I think you're going to kill me before you even hear what I have to say. So what's the point of me even answering you? You're going to kill me anyways, so I'm dead, so what's the point? So Umar said, no, don't worry. We're going to listen to what you have to say first before we kill you. We're going to listen to your excuse. If you have a good excuse, we'll let you go. We'll see. So then Hormuzan said, okay, I'm really thirsty. I need some water. I can't speak. So they said, okay, fine. So they brought a bowl, like this very ordinary bowl that the Arabs used to use, and they brought him some water, and said, okay, drink this water. So then he said, this is what he said. He said, even if I was dying of thirst, I wouldn't drink from that bowl. That's how disgusting that bowl is for me. Because he's used to luxury. He's not used to this, this lifestyle. He can't imagine, what this is the headquarters of the Khalifa. This is ridiculous. So then they say, okay, fine. Now just look at the leniency here. Umar said, okay, fine. Bring him a nicer cup. Get him a nicer cup and bring him some water. So they go get a cup, nicer one. They bring him some water and they say, okay, drink. And he says, you know what? I think that while I'm drinking the water, before I finish, you're going to kill me. So there's no point in drinking. So Umar says, don't worry, I promise you that until you finish that cup of water, we're not going to kill you. So what does he do? He throws the water away and he says, I'm never going to drink and you can't kill me because you just promised that until I drink this cup of water, you can't kill me. So Umar's thinking, you liar, that's not what I said. He said, no, you promised. And the companions around him, they said, yeah, Umar, you did promise. So now he's stuck. So then Umar, he was really upset. And he says, you deceived me. You tricked me, but I'm not going to trick you. So he says, look, the only real way out of this, the only way for what you can do now, you need to accept Islam. It's time for you to accept Islam. And Hormuzan, seeing this, that the Muslims keep their promises, they show leniency, they do this, he accepted Islam. So this commander was captured, he accepted Islam, and he lived in Medina. And they gave him a stipend, 2,000 dirhams a year, to be a military consultant on the battles taking place in Persia. Okay, so it just shows you how the Muslims treat prisoners, and shows you how the Muslims deal with other people. Then Umar, he addressed the soldiers who had come from Iraq. And he says, why don't you treat the non-Muslims in the cities that you've conquered, why don't you treat them good so that they stop revolting against you? So there was a few revolts taking place. He said, they're revolting against you because you're not treating them properly. You need to treat them properly. So they responded and they said, no, we are treating them very well. It's not that we're not treating them properly. So then why are they revolting? He says, they're revolting, and this is a very important statement. He says, as long as the Persians have an emperor, they will be inclined towards the emperor. Two kings cannot exist in one land. So you only allowed us to conquer the cities when the armies were dispatched against us and when someone was treacherous. You wouldn't allow us to conquer any territory. These were your rules. But their leader is the one who's sending the armies against us. And he's going to keep on sending them until we do something about it. So we need to go and actually spread out. We need to conquer some more territory in order to put this guy to an end. Otherwise, it's just going to keep happening and happening again. So it shows you a very important point here. What was the Muslim policy when it came to war? It's very clear that Umar said, when the armies came out, or when there was a threat, or when there was a treachery, that's when the Muslims were actually allowed to do something about it. Otherwise, they were not allowed to just go around for no reason and just start expanding for no reason. So now Umar agreed and he says, okay, you're right. We do need to take a little bit different strategy and we need to start spreading out so that we stop this Yazid guy in his tracks. So we will stop here when it comes to Persia. And we will shift over to Syria, where we left off last time. Where did we leave off? Which battle? Important battle? Yarmouk. Okay? So we will move back here and then we'll move back to Persia again after a little bit. So Greater Syria, and then we'll cover Egypt afterwards, not today. So as soon as Umar became the Khalifa, one of the first things that he did was he removed Khalid ibn al-Walid from his post as supreme commander, and he made him a normal commander, and he put Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah in charge. Now the question is, why did he do this? And what did Khalid do about it? So first of all, why did Umar do this? Khalid was demoted to a general. Umar's opinion was that Khalid was a little bit careless. Khalid is this really powerful, commando-like guy, He's a fighter, he's very brave, good strategist, but he can be a little bit careless sometimes, in Umar's opinion. So he says, that worked in the beginning. To get our way into the Roman territory and the Persian territory, we needed somebody like Khalid. But now it's time to slow down a little bit. It's time to be more cautious. We need somebody who's a little bit more careful. So we're going to take Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah instead, and he's going to be in charge. Now what did Khalid do? Just imagine this, okay? Khalid is now world-renowned. The Persians are scared of him, and the Romans are scared of him. Right? So he's already a really world-renowned figure. What would he do? He could have tried a coup and say, you know what, this army listens to me. It doesn't listen to the commander in the back. I could attempt a coup. I can at least hold a grudge. I can be upset. I can do all of these things. And this happens in history a lot. Right? Whenever a commander is deposed or something like that, what do? They go against the leader who deposed them. But Khalid was a Muslim, he was a believer. So for the believer, what was his thinking? His thinking, it doesn't matter what position I am, my job is to serve Allah and to serve this religion. It doesn't matter if I'm demoted or I'm promoted, my job is to keep working for the sake of Allah. So he continued in his position as commander rather than supreme commander. He became a general instead. And he continued in his post. And this is huge because he didn't even argue, he didn't even put up like a major fight or anything like that. He said, okay, that's the way it is, that's the way it is. What am I going to do? So Khalid was removed from his senior position to a junior position. But he was still in a very important position. Now what happens? Now we're going to talk about the conquest of Damascus and the remaining areas of Sham. Sham meaning Greater Syria. Okay? So after Yarmouk, Heraclius, the Roman emperor, what did he do? He sent reinforcements to protect Damascus. Now Damascus was a major city in that area where there was a seat of Roman power. So Damascus is historically a very important city. So Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, he decides it's time to besiege the city of Damascus. So now, especially with all of what's going on in Syria today, this is really interesting to compare how the Muslims took Damascus from the Romans, who, by the way, they were not exactly the fairest people, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later. So Abu Ubaidah, he besieged the city on one side of Damascus, and he put Khalid on the other side of the city. So now Damascus is surrounded, okay? And while Heraclius is somewhere else, he's kind of up there, he's going to be sending troops down to go and help the Romans. So Abu Ubaidah, he puts other battalions out there to intercept the reinforcements that are going to be sent, so that nobody in Damascus actually gets any help, so that they actually end up surrendering. So this is a very heavily fortified city. So what kind of weapons did they have? The Muslims just surrounded them. See, keep in mind, this is really interesting, is that Muslims knew Arab war strategies. And Arab war strategies, there were no cities like this that had huge walls around the cities and fortifications and all that. This was only in Roman and Persian territories. They were not used to this. So they don't know what to do when it comes to dealing with the gates and the walls. They don't have those battering rams to break down the wall. They don't do this kind of thing because they're not used to this. So they're sitting out there surrounding the city, and the city is launching catapults, and they're showering the Muslim soldiers with arrows all the time. So they're putting out for a very long time. So after 2 months of sitting outside and waiting outside the city of Damascus, what happens? Khalid ibn al-Walid was very intelligent. He used to send out spies every single night to figure out what's going on and to see some kind of weakness if he can figure it out. So imagine every night for 2 months he's sending out somebody, hoping maybe there's going to be something going on. The patriarch of the city had a child. He had a child, and he threw this big feast. And he invited the Roman soldiers, and he invited other people of the city, and they were partying, like the other time we talked about. They were partying, and the Roman soldiers got drunk. So as soon as Khalid ibn al-Walid heard about this, he got the information, he immediately set out with a team of his little special commandos. They had some rope, they went straight to the wall, and they told the Muslim army, when you hear Allahu Akbar shouting from the inside the city, you come to the door. So they said, okay. They went straight to the wall, got the ropes, scaled the wall, opened it from the inside, and started shouting Allahu Akbar. And the Muslim army came in from that side of Damascus, into the city of Damascus, and they went inside. The Roman guards are half drunk. They don't know what's going on. So they start taking over that part of the city. As Khalid ibn al-Walid is entering the city from this side, who does he see coming from the other side? Abu Ubaidah. He sees Abu Ubaidah. Now Khalid is fighting with his army, and Abu Ubaidah is not fighting. He says, what the heck's going on? So it turns out Abu Ubaidah signed a peace agreement on the other side and entered the city. And Khalid is coming through here and he's fighting. So now there's a problem. The problem is, was Damascus taken by force, or was it taken through a peace treaty? So we have to figure out, or do we divide the city? Because there's a difference between a peace treaty and a difference between being taken over by force. If you take it over by force, you're going to lose all your possessions because you kept fighting. You didn't give up. If you give in to the peace treaty, then you get concessions. So they had to make a decision. What's going to happen? Khalid said, hey, I scaled the wall. I figured out the weakness. We took the city. And Abu Ubaidah, he says, no, we already signed the peace treaty on the other side of the city, and we made it over here. So in the end, what did they do? They decided everyone in the city is going to be part of the peace treaty. They didn't have to do that, but it shows you the Muslims and how they deal with war and how they deal with other people. So everyone was a part of that treaty. What does the document actually say? What is this peace treaty saying? Let's take a look at it. It says, it basically says that all the people of Damascus, their lives will be protected, their property will be protected, their churches will be protected, and their houses will be protected. Furthermore, no Muslim soldiers will be allowed to reside in any of the houses without permission. Right? Quartering. No quartering is going to take place either. Okay? And then they put, Yazid ibn Abi Sufyan, Abu Sufyan's son Yazid, they put him as governor over the city. Okay? So they install a governor over there. What does Khalid do next? Khalid ibn al-Walid, he then moves up north to actually go and try to deal directly with Heraclius. So he goes up north to Antakya, which is Antioch, which is the capital it's the capital of Syrian operations for the Roman Empire. So he goes up and Heraclius gets scared and he runs back to Constantinople. He runs back to the city of Constantinople, and within a short period of time, we're not going to get into all the details, all of these cities most of Sham, most of Syria is taken. Antakya, Antioch is taken, Hims, Qaysariya, Ba'labak, Ajnadin, Nasibin, the entire region of Jordan, all these regions are falling because Heraclius is gone. So the Muslims are taking over all of this region. And then we come to, so which region are we talking about? So we zoom in, okay, this is Syria here. So this was Damascus. Okay, basically they took Beirut, they took Damascus, they took all this region over here, especially the coastal cities, a lot of coastal cities. They took the coastal cities all the way up to here, Halab and these areas. Okay, so now what happens? Now we come to Jerusalem. Okay, what's known as Elia in history, the city of Elia, people of Elia. Jerusalem, a very important city, Al-Quds or Bayt al-Maqdis. The Muslims decide, okay, now it's time to take the holy city. Once the surrounding cities, so they went to the surrounding cities in Palestine. Then they came in and it was time to take Jerusalem. So they sieged Jerusalem. The people, they realized Heraclius is not going to be able to do anything. Now why did they wait? It's important to understand why did they wait. They waited because Heraclius is up here, right? He's all the way back. Where is he? He's in Istanbul actually. Constantinople is Istanbul. So Heraclius came all the way back here. He's not going to be sending too many reinforcements. Once this region is all controlled by the Muslims, they can take over this area of Jerusalem very easily. So now, it's time to go into Jerusalem. So what do? The people realize, okay, we're going to make a peace treaty. Because, why do we make a peace treaty? Muslims are very easy people to deal with. And they have very easy terms. Let's just let them in. It's going to be a lot easier on us. So they say, okay, we're gonna let them in. We can't withstand them anyways. We don't have any army or anything. But they put one condition. One very strange condition. They said, we want the Khalifa to come from Medina to us, and he's the only one who can write the peace treaty for us. He's got to travel all the way from Medina. So, this is a strange thing. It was strange enough to send Hormuzan to Medina. Now they want the Khalifa to come to them. So what do they do? They could keep on the siege. The siege could keep going for a while. So Umar in Medina decides to consult with people. He gets the news. He said, what should we do? Should I actually go? Umar said, I can go. I don't have a problem. So they start consulting. Some of the companions, they say, you don't need to go. They can't put up a fight anyways. And this might be a stalling tactic. You don't know if this is a trick. Maybe they're just trying to stall you so that they're hoping Heraclius is going to send reinforcements and then we're going to have to put up a fight. So there's going to be a fight ensuing. So don't let them do that. They're going to surrender anyways. Let them surrender. They're going to lose anyways. Other companions, they say, peace is always better than war. So if you could do something to get the peace, let's go for the peace. So Umar decided, okay, fine. It's not a big deal. I'm going to go and I'm going to sign the peace agreement myself personally. So he sets out on this journey. And this is a really historic journey. Okay, he leaves with a bag of barley for food, a camel, and one wooden cup. His clothes, by the way, they're full of patches. Umar is a very, very simple person. So when he arrived, he's welcomed by the leaders of the Muslims. Who are the leaders of the Muslims? Abu Ubaidah, Khalid, and Yazid, the governor of Damascus. And these guys, they're wearing Persian clothing. The nice silk brocade clothes that the Persians were wearing and everything, they started wearing all of that. Now, I know men are not supposed to wear silk, but during wartime, it's an exception. You can wear silk. And this is in the books of fiqh. The reason why is because silk, it basically intimidates the enemy because of its shine, because of the way that it looks, and all of that. So they started wearing that. Okay, so these were wearing silk and all that. As soon as Umar saw them, he picked up some dirt and he started throwing it at them. He started yelling and shouting at them. He says, you know what? You guys have changed. It's only been 2 years. You've been gone from Medina for 2 years and you dress like this? So Umar was really, really upset. And he got really upset at the way that they're dressing. So they responded and they said, look, we're not dressing like, a bunch of girls or something like that. We got all the weapons underneath. We got armor underneath. We're still prepared here. And he says, we have to do this in order to, deal with, this is warfare. So we need to do this to intimidate the enemy. So Umar, he let them go. He didn't 100% agree, but he kind of let them go. So it shows you something interesting. It shows you how the Muslims who were away from Arabia and they were experiencing the Persian luxury and the Roman luxury, how they started to change in their behavior. Whether they had a good intention or they didn't have a good intention, even the ones who had a good intention, their habits were changing. And this is really interesting because especially people who make the argument about, imitating a group of people. If you imitate there's a hadith of the Prophet, peace be upon him. When you imitate a group of people, you're like that people. Right? The thing is, what were they doing? They were imitating the Persian habits. But there's a difference. See, that hadith is restricted. Anyways, we're going to talk about that on Sunday in Islamic law class. But that hadith is talking about people who have that sole characteristic as their identity and no one else can take it. Something very different, like wearing a cross, or wearing a nun's dress, or wearing the thing of a priest or something like that. So specific to people. So the Muslims were starting to change. Doesn't mean that they had bad intentions necessarily. But the lifestyle was changing. The way that they were eating and drinking was changing because they were living in those environments. So let's take a look at the peace treaty. So the peace treaty, generally, this is the summarized version of the peace treaty. It basically said, peace is given to all the people of Ilya, which is the people of Jerusalem, whether they be fit and in good health or ill and incapacitated. So it applies to all people, whether they're healthy, they're sound, whatever it is, it applies to everyone. Security is guaranteed for their lives, their wealth, their churches, and their crosses even. Not just their churches, even their crosses, their symbols are even going to be protected. Their churches will neither be inhabited nor will they be demolished. The boundaries are not to be damaged. You can't even mess with the boundary of the church. Okay, so he's specifying to such level of detail. Their cross will not be desecrated and their religion will not be defiled. If any of the residents choose to take themselves and their property to Roman territory, which by the way is enemy territory, then their lives and their property will be provided full safety until they reach the destination. So if you don't want to live under the Muslims, and you want to go and live under the Romans, we will guarantee you protection until you get to Roman territory. That's your choice. Now just think about that treaty and think about what people accuse Islam of. About they're going to bring Sharia to this country and they're going to bring this and they're going to bring that and what's implied in all of those statements. If we understand our history, we don't even need to know the details of the Islamic law to understand what Muslims not only wrote, not what was in Islam, but what they practiced. This is very, very important history and it's very important to understand these things that were happening. Because you get Christians and other people coming all the time. I get reporters coming all the time asking me that, what would happen if Islam did take over? All the churches would be destroyed, right? And all of this would happen, right? And all of that would happen. Just look at your history. Look at the history and then look at our books of law. And then you tell me what they say. And I said, now, take a look at your books and take a look at your history and you tell me what happened and what your book said. And compare the two and then we would, if you knew what they said, and if you knew what your book said, and if you knew what our book said, and if you knew your history and you know our history, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But then we have to have the conversation because people don't know their history. So it's very, very important to understand what actually took place here. And this is agreed upon. This is This is according to Muslim sources as well as Roman sources. So even the Romans documented this. So we're not talking about just Muslim sources here. Okay, Muslims are not just making up this history somewhere. So Omar, when he came, the doors of Jerusalem were open for him. So they were open, he entered into the city, and as he entered into the city, he went to the Aqsa sanctuary. So what is Al-Aqsa, right? What is Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa as mentioned in the Quran, where the Prophet ﷺ actually went? What was the Masjid Al-Aqsa at that time? How big was it? Small Masjid Al-Aqsa? Like a little place like this? There was no Masjid Al-Aqsa, right? Masjid Al-Aqsa means the area. It means this land, this region. It's a place. It's not an actual building at this point in time. So even when the Prophet ﷺ traveled there, there was not an actual, when we say masjid, masjid literally means a place of prostration, place where you pray. But it wasn't an actual building left because it had been destroyed and rebuilt and destroyed over time, for over a long period of time. So this whole region is Al-Aqsa. Okay, it's the Aqsa region or the Aqsa territory or sanctuary, whatever you want to call it. So Umar went straight over there and he bowed down in prostration. The first thing he does when he enters, by the grace of Allah, goes straight into prostration. So then the leaders invited him to the Church of Resurrection. The Eastern Orthodox Church calls the Church of Resurrection. The Western Church calls it the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This is the church where they believed, Jesus was, resurrected and, other stuff happened. So it's a very, very holy church for Christians. And he went into the courtyard of the church. So Omar is in the courtyard of the church and he's talking to the patriarch, to the leader and everything, talking to the other people. And it's time for prayer. So he says, okay, you know what? I need to pray. So the guy offered him, he says, you can pray right here in the church. There's no problem with you praying inside the church. And Umar refused. He said, no, I cannot pray here. I need to go outside, I'm going to pray. So he went outside and he prayed like on the steps of the church, outside, like right on the boundary area. And then he came back and he explained himself and he said, look, the reason why I didn't pray is if I did pray inside, then I'm afraid that the Muslims that come after me, they would take this church away from you. And they would make it into a masjid and they would say, this is the place where Umar prayed, this belongs to us. And he says, and I don't want to open that, I don't want to open the door for them to even take it away from you someday, not even now. And then Umar, he wrote an injunction, he wrote a declaration saying that no prayer should be performed at the place where I prayed, and no adhan, no call to prayer should be made from that same area. So cautious and so careful of securing the rights of the people who actually could not have put up a fight. We're talking about securing minority rights. These are not majority anymore because they were sieged just a few, days ago or let's say a previous day ago. So then Umar asked him, he said, show me a place where I can build a mosque. This is some reports, they say that. So they found basically a place. They said, you know what, this is a good area, this is a good area. So they decided, this is a holy area as well. This is in the sanctuary, this is in the Al-Aqsa compound. You can go ahead and build over there. What was over there? A bunch of rubbish, trash on the floor. So Umar goes and he starts picking up the trash himself with his garment, holding it in his clothes and transporting it away. And all the Muslims go, they start cleaning up this site, and this is where Masjid Al-Aqsa was actually built for the first time. Okay, so this is Al-Aqsa. The next year, or like 2 years after, the plague hits the city of Syria. Now what is the plague? The plague is known as the Black Death. Right? The plague is basically this disease which transfers from rodents to human beings. It causes their lymph nodes to swell up. And once you're completely afflicted with the disease, it just gets into your entire body. You start coughing up blood. This was one guy's explanation from one historian, non-Muslim historian's explanation of what the plague does. Then you start coughing up blood for 3 days continuously, and then you die. That's pretty much what the plague is, a really, really bad disease. It's like the cancer of today. Alright, but really they had no treatments for it or anything along those lines. Nothing that really worked. So this is really interesting that happened. So the plague hit the region of Syria. It just so happened that Umar was on his way to Syria again for a visit. He was on his way from Medina to the region of Syria to go and visit and to see how things are going. While he's on his way, he gets news that the plague is broken out in this area. It broke out in other areas, but it broke out in this area in particular. So then he was deciding and he was debating. He says, what should we do? Should we enter the city or should we go back to Medina? And we're going to study this in the theology class a little bit more, but this is an important story. So then they started consulting. So some of his companions, they said, look, you left, you were going to the city for the sake of Allah. And when you're doing something for the sake of Allah, nothing should stop you. You don't go back, you keep your faith in Allah, you trust in Allah, and you go forward and nothing's going to happen to you, inshallah. And the other companions, they said, no, this is the plague, you don't walk right into a disease-stricken area, you go back to Medina. So Umar thought about it and he says, okay, that's it. We're going back to Medina. So Abu Ubaidah, he actually rebuked Umar and he said, are you fleeing from the Qadrullah? Are you fleeing from the decree of Allah? You're running away from Allah's decree that you're going there. You're running away from the decree of Allah. So Umar said, yes, I am fleeing from the decree of Allah to the decree of Allah. And then he explained himself with an example. He said, if you had some camels and they entered into a land which has two different sides. One side has a lot of greenery and one side is barren. And you go and you put your camels to go and eat on the nice land. That's the qadr of Allah. That's the decree of Allah. You put your camels there by the decree of Allah. And if you change your camels and you make them feed on the other side, that's also from the decree of Allah. He says, you get to choose. Allah has decreed both of these things. Decree of Allah doesn't mean that Allah is forcing you to go and do something. So he was trying to explain his position. He was trying to explain his stance. So anyways, this is, so Umar went back. So the plague lasted for only a few months actually. Usually it would have lasted for a very long time. But it lasted for a few months. Abu Ubaidah ended up dying. He was replaced by Amr ibn al-As as the leader at that time. And Amr ibn al-As went and took the Muslim army and they went up to the hills. So they were away from the plague. And the plague died out. Yazid, who's the governor of Damascus, we talked about Yazid ibn Abi Sufyan, he also died and he was replaced by his brother Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, the son of Abu Sufyan. And Muawiyah is going to become a very important figure coming up. So we're going to be talking about that. So it looks like that's all we have for today. Inshallah, this can be an extended Q&A session if you have questions. Yes, Muawiyah was put in power by Umar specifically, yes. Because he makes all the decisions. Umar is going to be making all the major decisions. No, there were Jews there as well. There were Jews and the Jews were part of the agreement as well. The Jews were mentioned in the treaty. So there were Jews living there. What exactly happened to the Jews, I have not looked into in detail. But yeah, they were living there. There were people of different religions living in Jerusalem actually. Abu Ubaidah made the peace treaty with the people on the other side of the city. Whoever was the leader at that side of the city, Damascus is a huge city. So yeah, exactly. That's a good question. So why didn't the other people in Damascus know that the peace treaty was being written? Because probably the peace treaty was something that if it doesn't work when they come inside, then the other people in the back can keep on fighting. So it's probably partly a trick. This happens a lot. A lot of the people, they enter into a peace treaty as a trick. But you can't tell if they're tricking or if they're legitimately entering into peace. So it could have been a strategy that they had. We don't know. It's hard to tell. There's a very high possibility of that. Later historians mention that the reason why Umar put Khalid ibn al-Walid down was because people were saying that it's Khalid that's winning all the battles. But that's only later historians. So that's their analysis of Umar's decision, but it's not a statement of Umar itself, or at least I've not been able to come across it, and I've seen that it's only the statement of the explanation given by some scholars. So personally, that would make sense if that was his reason, but I'm not too inclined to believe that that was the real reason. That I actually don't know, but there are remnants of the White Palace still there today. and the remnants are still there. I don't know if it turned, I would assume that it turned into a masjid because they were performing Jum'ah there. But what was the history and for how long did it last? I don't know. Because people kind of stopped caring about Al-Madain after they founded Kufa and Basra. So it was not that great of a city anymore. So the thing is, that whole area is called Aqsa. Now, exactly which spot did he pray in? Well, they say Dome of the Rock was a spot, But other than that, which part has to have the masjid? The masjid could be on any part, because that whole compound is considered Al-Aqsa compound. It's the same place. It's the same place. It's Al-Aqsa. And that's one of the problems. That's part of, some people think it's a conspiracy, and I think it's a conspiracy as well. Everywhere you find, for some strange reason, even Muslims, on the back of their books sometimes, or in their pictures, they put a picture of Dome of the Rock. And they write underneath it, Masjid al-Aqsa. That's not Masjid al-Aqsa. I've seen it even on a book that we distribute in our masjid, Islam in Focus, on the back of the book, says Masjid al-Aqsa, and it's got a picture of Dome of the Rock. So when I was in Palestine, the Palestinians were telling me, they said, this is done on purpose, because they're excavating underneath Masjid al-Aqsa, and you can see it when you go there. They're excavating underneath there, and they're trying to take over this region. So by showing the rest of the Muslims in the world, look, you still have your Masjid al-Aqsa, but that's not Masjid al-Aqsa. This is a problem. Masjid al-Aqsa has a silver dome, not the golden dome. Yeah, they've been digging for a very long time, and they're saying that the Temple of Sulaiman, Temple Mount, is underneath there. These two things that we talked about, they're happening simultaneously. So the battles in Persia and the battles in the Roman territory, they're happening at the same time. We just couldn't cover them one back this way, one back that way. So I just covered one region and another region. They're actually happening at the same time. Oh yeah, of course, yeah. Rabi'i, he was doing this deliberately to show that, you guys are living luxury. We don't care about this. Because the thing is, why would you set up like a royal palace in the middle of a desert where you're about to go to war? It's just for intimidation and showing off purposes. So they wanted to show, we don't care about your luxury. You could show off all you want, we don't care. It was part of the lesson. Because they were trying to show off, so they responded with it was a lesson. This is not the way they're actually normally going to behave. They were just trying to put a lesson out there. That's the one we talked about. They walked through it. I know, sometimes they mention they walked over the water, but actually they're walking through the water. Yeah. Some people, sometimes they do add a little, flair to the story about walking over that. They actually walked through. So in a way, this is miraculous in the sense that no one got killed as well. But sometimes it's portrayed as being a little bit over. We do have different history books that sometimes there are some incidents that are mentioned differently. Sometimes the names are different, and sometimes some of the dates on some events are different. But when you look at all of them across the board, there's a general, core nucleus of what happened for sure, and then some details may be changed. Like for example, important events like the conquest of Jerusalem is well known. The document is definitely well known. Battle of Yarmouk, the fact that it happened and the Muslims won is well known. Battle of Qadisiyah happened is well known. These, like all the main part of the story is well known. Sometimes the numbers of the army is up and down. Sometimes you see 150,000, sometimes you see 120,000, sometimes you see 200,000 in the same battle. So it could be up or down depending on, it's hard to estimate the army exactly determined. But for sure, Muslims were outnumbered all the time. The question is just how much were they outnumbered by? Were they outnumbered by 1 to 3, 1 to 4, 1 to 5, 1 to 6? But so the core is there for sure, but sometimes the numbers will fluctuate. Sometimes was this guy at the battle or was he not at the battle? Or did he play a major role or did he not play a major role? So some of those things will fluctuate. Oh, this one? I'm going through several sources. Several different sources. So I'm going through Tabari, I'm going to Ibn Khaldun, going through Mas'udi, who's not very reliable, but Mas'udi, he was Shi'i Persian actually. But the thing is, because he wrote his book so nicely, a lot of people take from him, even though he's not very reliable. If you write a nice book, people generally take from you. So the Sunnis use this book as well, although they're very careful when they're using it. So most of these events, if there's some, the thing is, the problem is going to start when the issue between Ali and Muawiyah and all of that, that's when you have to be even more careful. You have to be really careful with your sources. Here, there's not a major, there's no major issues, These are the sources that the Western academics have to go to as well. But see, what's happened, let me tell you what happened, now that you brought up academia. What's happened is, there's Orientalists or Western scholars who've been studying Islam since like the 1600s. So what they did was, those early scholars started translating and writing a bunch of books on Islamic history, and they did a lot of work. Because keep in mind, they're getting paid a lot of money because they're empire and all of that. So they got all these books. Now what happens is, all these modern scholars for the last 100 years or 200 years, they go, and instead of going back to the original Muslim sources, usually they go back to the Orientalist sources. So the thing is, they say, well, we go with these sources. Now, where in the world did those guys get their sources from? They had to go back to Muslim sources, right? So it's just using different sources because you don't want to go back to the originals. So a lot of writers don't do that anymore. But if you write your PhD or something like that, you have to go back to the original Arabic sources. You're not allowed to go back. You have to go to primary sources. But the thing is, once you get your PhD, you're a professor now. Now you can write a bunch of books and you don't need to go back to primary sources anymore. So this is what you find happening. So you look at books by Karen Armstrong, you look at what's it called, Oxford's Easy Guide to Muslim History, a very short introduction to Islamic history. All these books, David Cook and all these guys, they don't go to primary sources because they already did their PhD and done with it. Now it's just mass marketing to everyone, and they come up with very strange theories. Like, if you pay close attention to everything, that's because I'm selecting like the most important things that you really are important. If you pay attention closely, you'll be able to answer all of some of the ridiculous things. Let me give you an example. Montgomery Watt and Karen Armstrong. Okay, two like really well-respected scholars who appear to be sympathetic to Islam. What is their argument? They argue that the Muslims used Persian slaves in all of their battles to fight for them where they didn't fight their own battles. Okay? How would you respond to that? Outside of the fact that it's just a ridiculous statement, okay, how would you actually, with a good 1 or 2, 3 points, how would you respond to that? Okay, number one, they're battling at the same time. So how in the world could they have all the Persian slaves in Roman territory while they're happening at the same time? That's one. Number two, obviously, so they were fighting the Persians, they're obviously not going to use the Persian slaves against the Persians. What is jizya? Jizya is the poll tax. You can't be drafted. You can't become part of the army as long as you're paying the poll tax. So how do you become... So they complain about the jizya. In all these books, they always complain about the poll tax. And then after that, they say, no, but they took a bunch of slaves, and the slaves did all the fighting, the Arabs sat back and relaxed. Doesn't make any sense. And number four, all the companions that are mentioned, that are dying and that are doing all these things, what happened to them, right? So these kind of arguments, they come up. It's like, this is a very common argument. And I'm seeing it in like so many books. I'm trying to figure out, I've been trying to send them emails, and like, where in the world did you come up with? What happened is these Orientalists, before the 1800s and all that, they just had a very, really big anti-Islamic bias. So they kind of get this, baggage left over, and they kind of like absorb it, and they figure out a way to, rationalize it. Their point is that Muslims didn't have the courage to fight for themselves, and instead somehow they had a bunch of Persians, enslaved them, and made them do all the fighting. And they took out the entire Persian Empire and Roman Empire through Persians. So it just doesn't make any sense. It really doesn't add up. So stuff like that. And there's some other things which are, if I come across them, if you decide to read those books. I'm talking even in the early period here, there's just some really ridiculous stuff. So first, that was in the beginning. Probably it was raised, but the thing is that the Khalifa himself didn't care for that. Right? So like Umar, whatever he was getting, he didn't care for that. So he didn't really leave much behind. We're going to see. He didn't leave much behind at all. In fact, he died in debt. So he didn't care for that. They're trying to show some status to a guy who came from a luxurious lifestyle and accepted Islam now. So they're giving him a little special treatment because of where he came from. That's the reasoning behind it. The same way the Prophet ﷺ, that after the Battle of Hunayn, he gave extra wealth to people like Abu Sufyan and stuff when they came into Islam, because they came from that class and that status. And remember, the Ansar were complaining and all of that. So they're applying the same principle. give him something extra because he comes from that class. But Uthman came into Islam very early when they didn't have any money. Yeah, remember, this is only for new Muslims. New Muslims to soften their heart. So that's what it was for. So that's why they're giving him extra money. So that he accepted Islam. Now, how legitimately, initially, how sincere is his Islam? We don't know exactly. But the guy was just fighting against the Muslims the previous week, right? Revolting. This guy needs to be shown some extra kindness, So this was another example of them showing some extra kindness to Hormuzan. Yeah. Ali actually, when Umar left to Jerusalem, and both times when he left Ali in charge of Medina, actually. So Ali was working with Umar. They were very close. So he actually left him in charge of the city, which shows you his status. I think Umar kept him in Medina as a consultant for him. Not that I know. Not really. Maybe he was in one or two battles, but nothing major, because he was mainly in Medina with Umar. So like Abu Bakr kept Umar all the time in Medina. So he was not participating in any battles either. So at that time, Abu Bakr kept Ali as well in Medina while other things were going on. So for the most part, they were kept. Oh yeah, because they're senior companions, so they need consultation. So who's Umar going to consult with? He wants to consult with the top people, and he can't just keep calling them back every time when they're in the middle of a battle. So he wants to keep his top guys around him in Medina. That's why Abu Bakr asked Usama's permission for Umar to stay in Medina so he can consult with him all the time. Yeah, so all the money that was coming into Medina, it was being distributed amongst the people. So Umar, we're going to talk about that too next week. So Umar set up a system, what's called a diwan system, where you pay public employees and they're going to be going and looking and distributing to all the people. So he set up all of these type of different endowments and different projects and everything. So he was using the money to dig wells. He was constructing bridges. He was, building up all the different regions around Arabia and other parts. Anyone who was poor amongst the Muslims, he was distributing money to them. Anyone who was poor or old from the non-Muslims, he was also distributing money to them as well. So this money was being distributed. So we're gonna talk about his economic policy next week, inshallah. I've heard there's Islam Bull, and one of the brothers also mentioned that to me during the break time. One of my teachers actually mentioned that it was Islam Bull as well. And one of the brothers who just came to me, he said Bull means like many, and Islam means that. So, Bushra, do you know the history? No? Okay. Khair. So yeah, I've heard that. Allah knows if that's the reality of it or not. Yeah, so that's a good question. So Umar set a rule. The rule was no soldier can be forced to keep on fighting or keep on staying in the army for 4 months without being able to see his family. So he set up the rule of 4 months. Now where did he get the idea of 4 months from? The woman who dies 4 months and 10 days? Assuming that she dies. it's a good, very close, good guess actually. There's another place. Where did he get it from? Inshallah, we're going to be covering it probably this week or next week in the Islamic law class. He didn't just come up with a random number. 4 months came from somewhere. Okay, basically, if you swear off your wife for a period of time and it lasts for 4 months, then what happens? Automatically divorced. It's in the Quran. So most likely he's coming up with this number from the Quran, because you're avoiding your wife for that period of time. And this is what Arabs used to do. This is swear off their wife as a way to hurt them. So he says this is like swearing off your wife in the sense that you're not going to keep company with her, you're not going to sleep with her and everything. So 4 months, so this is a good number to come up with. Oh no. Okay, in terms of army, no. In terms of if you make a statement, it says, you know what, I'm not going to touch you, I'm not coming near you, and then it lasts for this period of time, the divorce will take place. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik nastaghfirukallah wa natubu ilayk.